Restoring an old Thunderjet 500 to its original condition. Items that will help you through this process: an old transformer, some electronics cleaner, some copper cleaner, some old standard oil, Q-tip, toothpick, the eraser on a pencil, screwdriver, toothbrush, some floss, and this is the vehicle that we will be bringing back to its original state. In its present condition, this car will not run at all. I hope to have it running wonderfully by the end of this video. The first thing I will do is basically dismantle this Ford Galaxy Tjet. I have placed a few drops of copper cleaner in the center of the chassis. I have coated the copper on the bottom of the chassis with the same cleaner. I will place copper cleaner on the underside of the pickup shoes, the clamp, and the gear. I have placed those 4 parts on the chassis and will now put copper cleaner on top of those 4 parts. I will now let this set for a few minutes while I attend to the motor. I will now gently wipe away whatever dirt I'm able to from the bottom of the armature with a clean piece of paper toweling. Next, with the end of a pencil eraser, I will again gently try to wipe away or erase some of the dirt from that armature. So that is an excellent improvement. I will now, with a very fine sandpaper, try to remove as much of that ground in oil, really, off of that armature. Burned on oil. And so that armature is quite clean, not perfectly clean. I will now squirt some electronics cleaner onto the end of a Q-tip. I will use the Q-tip to clean those 3 grooves. You'll be surprised how much dirt will come out of them. And then also add a further cleaning to the bottom of the armature. And with it still wet, I will just basically clean off the dirt from the rest of the plastic part of the armature assembly. If the armature plate is extremely dirty, you can use a toothpick to get dirt out of the edges. I will use a very fine sandpaper to gently restore the tops of those gears. And so they look beautiful. I have placed a very small amount of oil at the top of the gear, and with the dental floss, I will work that oil to underneath that gear so it'll provide a very smooth running surface. I've also placed oil around these 2 gears, and I will once again work that oil under the gear with the dental floss, so there will be a very smooth surface, well lubricated surface for those gears to spin around. When done, wipe off as much excess oil as you possibly can. I will now clean the commutator brushes by simply running them once or at the most twice along the sandpaper. I will now clean this chassis under some warm water and somewhat vigorously scrub it with a very soft, bristled toothbrush. The copper cleaner did a beautiful job, along with a careful yet vigorous brushing with a toothbrush. I will now use a screwdriver to scrape the contact points on those brass parts in the middle of the chassis. The one looks like it needs to be straightened a little. I will do that as well. I will now add a film of oil to that hole in the middle of the chassis, to the hole at the rear of the chassis where the gear will stick through, and actually I put a film of oil where the axles also go through. 6 different points. I will now wipe away any excess oil. I have begun rebuilding the chassis. I find that the commutator brushes are easiest to work with when they are on that slight angle leaning down towards the center prior to putting the armature assembly in. Time for the first test. Very nice. I have spun these gears using the oil dipper, therefore leaving the slightest film of oil on these gears. I have spun the oil dipper around the center holding spot for the middle gear. I will lightly sand that middle gear so its sheen is similar to the 2 gears I previously cleaned. Once the last gear is added, wipe off all excess oil from the top. Time for test number 2. Very strong. I now will do a final sanding of all contact points. The one brush will need a little additional sanding because it has some grooves that need to be removed. I use very fine sandpaper, and the brush position indicates a place that needs to be sanded as well. That chassis is looking beautiful. To maximize performance, while the chassis is running on the transformer, you can test the performance level by taking the screwdriver and pressing down so that the brushes have a stronger contact against the bottom of the armature. If the engine speeds up, then you can adjust the pressure of that brush against the armature by pushing the copper wires deeper into the slot. Obviously, you have to be very careful when you do that. However, in some cases, it radically, significantly increases the performance of the engine. I will use a vise to assist in putting the axles on the chassis. It helps significantly. After I have gently put the axle through as far as the vise will take it, I will simply turn it on its side and push it through the rest of the way. I will put the second hub on with a vise as well and adjust for the ultimate clearance or minimum clearance so the chassis spins freely. I have put a slight amount of oil on the drive gear and a drop of oil right in the very center of the chassis where the armature pokes out. I will put this on the transformer briefly. After it's run briefly, I will wipe off all excess oil. I will now adjust the front axle and hubs. The beauty about the front axle is it's just long enough where you can tighten it in the vise without it being too tight on the chassis. Both ends of this axle are touching the vise. Those tires will spin very freely. I use stock old front tires, and due to the need for traction, I do add new tires purchased from Weird Jack on eBay. And as far as fit and traction and look goes, they seem to be the best to me. Just prior to remounting, I did sand the heads of the screws slightly. So here's the car. Back together, cleaned it with a little bit of Windex, didn't do much to it. We'll give it a run on the track. I have an old style steering wheel control running power to both lanes. We're going to come out here. It's set up so it's running power to both lanes. We'll drop this car on and just let it go till it crashes. Obviously it's running really good. Motor's nice and clean. Slows down slightly up the hills and it goes slightly faster downhill. Here it comes. Very smooth, quiet, it's running well, and it wiped out. Okay, thanks. I hope this helps.